It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. It is Rose Bowl week. We're here a little bit early on the Dubcast this week. You know, we had to get up bright and early, get ready.
Yeah, we
had
fake pod
here.
Wednesdays come begging and say we can't drop on Wednesday the same day as the game. Can you please move your show up a bit? And was so gracious and generous here at the Dubcast. We said, sure thing.
That's
Deputy
right.
Editor Dan.
We're very we're very gracious here at the Dubcast. We're just the most polite, nicest people you'll ever meet. So we will talk about the Rose Bowl. We'll slide in ahead of Real Pod, and we'll get the people's attention. That's what they need, that lead in so that they can perform. Let's talk about some Rose Bowl stuff. First of all, this is just kind of a general question, George, and I know you're a little bit younger than me. Does the Rose Bowl have that magic to you? Do you have nostalgia for the quote unquote Rose Bowl as opposed to just like the Rose Bowl as a concept?
Yeah, I mean, my father would romanticize the game a lot when I was a kid. So that was a very integral part of my understanding of college football growing up, is how important the Rose Bowl is, how the stadium in Pasadena is the most scenic place to play in college football, which I still think holds true. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of how much of the how much value the event has retained in this new era of college football relative to what it used to mean. I get why it was looked upon so fondly back before the days of, mass media and the 24/7 news cycle and everybody always interconnected, because you were for pretty much the entire season immediately focused on what was surrounding you in the Midwestern scheme of the sport. And then if you were fortunate enough to be supporting the top team from the Big Ten at the end of the year, it was cool to see that best team from this certain part of the country square off with the best team in another part of the country that you haven't really been paying attention to for the rest of the year.
Right.
And for it to happen in a venue like the Rose Bowl, that they affectionately nicknamed the granddaddy of them all. So in this new era where it's not necessarily the Big Ten champion versus the Pac-12 champion, especially now that the Pac-12 has effectively ceased to exist as we know it, I can see how the game has lost some luster in that respect, and it is a shame. And it is a reflection of what we continue to talk about on this show relative to the regional flair of this sport dying out in favor of, more a greater emphasis being placed on the best teams regardless of where they're at, and TV ratings and all that. I still think the game is pretty special. It wouldn't upset me to see the national championship played in that game every single year. I think that would be something really cool to see, as opposed to, getting offshoots of, Tostitos Fiesta Bowl, or I think isn't it PlayStation Fiesta Bowl now or something?
It's not Tostitos anymore. Yeah.
The way that that the Rose Bowl in this new era still holds some key cultural significance in the sport is that every other bowl game, even the major ones, have a sponsor slapped in front of their name, but the Rose Bowl has to be the Rose Bowl presented by. You cannot. The Rose Society, I think they're the ones that put on the parade before the game and everything. They will not have the brand authority of that game challenged by mere corporate interests. You have to be conciliatory if you want to sponsor the event and come second fiddle to the granddaddy of them all, that is the Rose Bowl. So I'm still excited for the game just because of the venue that it takes place in, and I think it will always hold significance for that alone. But yeah, is it as special as it used to be, given the changes that have taken place in the sport? I don't think you can argue that it is.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first games as a kid that I was like super kind of invested in from an Ohio State fan standpoint was the 97 Rose Bowl. So I was almost 12. I was going to turn 12, a little bit later that year. So I was starting to get more into football, like starting to get more into Ohio State football. Up until then, I'd been mostly like a Cincinnati Reds and a Cincinnati Bearcats basketball fan. And I was like, oh, it's Eddie George, right? Like you see all these guys, and then okay, I'm getting a little invested. And winning that Rose Bowl in the way that they did, in the dramatic fashion that they came back and did it, that was something that was like imprinted on my brain. And this is also right on the cusp of the BCS being a thing, right? Which I think a lot of people would attribute to the Rose Bowl starting kind of to lose that primacy in people's minds, because now the goal wasn't, okay, if you're the best Big Ten team, you're going to the Rose Bowl. Now it's, you might go to some other bowl and win a national championship. And so that kind of lessened it a little bit. And I know that, the people who organized the Rose Bowl and a lot of traditionalists in the Big Ten didn't really enjoy that. And of course, now you've got, it's not even the final game that a lot of these teams will play, because they're going to go on and they'll play another game. They'll play the semifinal game, and then they'll go on and they'll play the national championship. So yeah, I agree. I mean, it's been lessened. It sucks in a way, because I do think it's significant, but I also think it's something that's been going on for damn near 30 years now. I mean, it's been a process of watching the sport evolve and kind of leaving some of those things behind. Now, with that said, it's still the Rose Bowl, right? It's still this incredible venue for college football. The background, the St. Gabriel Mountains in the background, the sun setting, doing it at 5:00 is genius, because you get like the daytime and the nighttime part, and then the sunset. I mean, it's just screams college football, every part of it. I like that we have an Ohio State Oregon matchup because it feels traditional, even if it's not. So yeah, there's still some nostalgic importance to me, but it's not something, I mean, honestly, like it feels like Ohio State's got bigger fish to fry, and that doesn't have that finality that it used to.
Bigger fish than Oregon.
Well, that's what I mean, but just in general, in terms of them trying to win the national championship.
I know,
if that
I know
makes
what
sense.
you mean.
Absolutely. So the teams are coming in. Ohio State, they've got the last time they're in the Rose Bowl, they got the against Utah, they had that rose stripe on the helmet, which you cannot see on television at all. It looks super cool up close. Can't see it at all on TV. Oregon mashed like 3 different uniforms together. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. It looks like crap.
No, it's like when you play NCAA football when you're a kid and you're doing the custom uniform settings. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, Oregon has like 12 different combinations, way more than any team. And so you just make your own custom one, and you're like, I'll take alternate jersey number 3, I'll take alternate pants number 7, and alternate helmet number 9, and and black socks, black shoes, and we're good. So that's really what it really is bizarre, because I feel like Oregon, especially, I mean, go figure, they've got the Nike affiliation, but they come correct on so many of their uniform combinations.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the combination they rolled out for playing Michigan earlier this year, where they focused on like basically gray, silver, and they had the chrome helmets, which they're going to have in this game too. But I remember thinking, my favorite part of the Ohio State uniform is the helmets.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, if I wanted, so I really don't want any of that. Like, if you're going to make alternates for Ohio State, I don't want the helmet to ever change, really. But I remember thinking, if there was ever a change they were going to make to the helmet, I would want the gray to adopt more of the chrome look that this Oregon alternate has, because it just looks, there's literally a shine to it. It's so nice. So
some of it's fantastic.
Yeah,
no, I agree.
That's why I can't believe that they're going with this hodgepodge combination. Yeah. It's bizarre.
It's like a toddler raided their parents' closet and said, "I'm putting this on, I'm putting this on, and I'm putting this on, and I'm going to school." Again, it has nothing to do with the actual game. I just think it's really funny because Ohio State came out in the catch-ups, which I like a lot more than I thought I would, and I think it looks pretty good. And then they come out and they're wearing the traditional road whites, which is fine. They should have the alternate stripes on the shoulders, but whatever.
Well, and
then
not only
Oregon's just
that, but the first time these two teams played earlier this season, Nike made a point of saying, this is the college football game of the year. We're going to make sure that both teams are dressed to impress. And now we're getting the rematch of that. And Nike has just said, you know what? Wear whatever you want, Ducks.
Fine, I guess we'll let you choose.
And we're gonna withhold the coveted sleeves from Ohio State until they make the national championship. Right. You have to earn those.
Yeah. It's so stupid. They just don't make it the regular uniform. It
may not be up to Nike, but I'm choosing to believe that it is.
I think it's
I can't imagine Ohio State doesn't listen to their own feedback enough.
I think it really is up to Ohio State. They could change it if they wanted to, and I don't think they're going to do it.
That's insane. Again, we can't actually.
That's everything
point to
I've
who
heard.
It is. It's so insane.
I've heard from multiple people it's up to Ohio State, and they don't want to do it.
Oh, multiple Ohio State uniform insiders.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I didn't.
That may or may not have previously been affiliated with 11 Warriors.
I didn't talk to the best of the best. So who knows? Maybe I'm just talking out my ass. So let's talk about the game just a little bit. We'll have more on this on the site and whatnot. I do want to say though, I feel weirdly at peace with this game. I think before the Tennessee game, I was like super on edge because I knew the stakes and particularly as it pertains to Ryan Day and all that stuff. Now I'm a little more chill about it. I wouldn't be happy if Ohio State lost. Obviously, I'd still be sad and upset. But to me, this feels like different kinds of stakes. Let me ask you this though, real quick. What do you think Ohio State needs to do specifically to up their game to win this game, and by doing something that they didn't do against Oregon the first time that they played them?
Well, I was covering the game or assisting in coverage of the game the first time these two teams played. So one of the things I had to do was listen to Dan Lanning bask in the glory of victory while the rest of us were wallowing in misery in the immediate aftermath of the result.
Yeah.
So I had to keep a keen ear open in terms of, everybody asking him like, why do you think you won this game? Or did this make a big difference or not? And I remember the two biggest things that he said relative to what he told Oregon going into the game were they had to win the rushing battle and they had to win on field position. They technically won the rushing battle, but they only outrushed Ohio State by maybe 10 yards.
Yeah,
it really, even though they technically won and they had success on the ground, it wasn't in such an absolutely outlandish way where it was a defining part of the game. So even though that was a key to victory for Oregon going into the last game, I don't necessarily think that is true in the rematch or that it was even true going into the original game. But they, if that's what they think was a pillar of their success, they won the game. They can lean on that. Credit to them. The bigger thing that he pointed out, which I thought was totally valid, was field position. Because if you recall in that game, Ohio State, I believe, had maybe one drive that started closer or like not at their own 25-yard line or further back than that. And that drive started at like their own 27. So they never started a drive anywhere further than that for the entire game.
And Oregon starting at like the 40, 45, like the entire game.
That's right. Yeah, they were starting with much better field position. They had a turnover early in the game that put them in the red zone that gave them the opportunity to equalize on an early touchdown. And granted, Judkins apparently had an injured hand in that game, and that might have affected ball security. And you would assume that is healed up now, and hopefully isn't going to play as much of a role in the rematch as it did in the first one. But the point remains that Oregon had an emphasis on winning on field position going into the last game, and that ended up bearing a lot of fruit. And that plays into what I think is actually going to be the key to success for Ohio State in the rematch, or at least going to be the deciding factor between which team wins and loses. Because one of the ways that you can drastically affect field position is in the same way that Oregon did it to Ohio State, is turnovers, which Ohio State didn't get any of against Oregon, except
Right.
for I think one weird sequence on like a extra point try or whatever, where those don't even really get officially counted as turnovers when there are blocks or whatever. There are no fumble recoveries. They didn't intercept Dylan Gabriel at all. The other way that you can affect it, and I think this is the much bigger key than even winning the turnover battle, is generating sacks, because those are not only drive killers in terms of putting teams in situations where they obviously have to throw to recover the ground that they got, but it also pushes further back a team in situations where they have to punt, and it can end up making a difference of recovering a punt maybe 10 yards further forward than you would have in, like, if a team has to punt on 4th and 10 as opposed to a 4th and 20 because there was a sack on 3rd and 10 on the
Right.
previous play. We are coming off of one of the only games in my estimation where both Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau showed up in tandem in the win over Tennessee. They need to carry that momentum and both show up in this rematch with Oregon, because they did not have much of a presence in the first game. And
Right.
it's one of the main reasons Dylan Gabriel was able to have as much success as he did. So I think the key is just going to be, do the bookends for Ohio State's pass rush show up? Can they generate more sacks than they did against Oregon the first time? And can that pressure help create turnovers in terms of affecting the decision making of Dylan Gabriel, to where they're able to capitalize on it with interceptions or strip sacks in the pocket? The biggest thing is just going to be, do they generate more pressure than they did in the
Right.
first game? And I think that if they're able to get turnovers as a result of that and win the battle as a result, they're going to probably give themselves the best chance to win.
I would say so. First of all, I agree with that. I think defensively, just as a general statement, I think this game will be won or lost in Ohio State's defense. I think Ohio State's offense will be fine. I don't know that they're going to score 30 points again, but I think they'll be score enough to keep them in the game. But it's really going to be all about the defense, and if they've changed their philosophy, their approach, like have they really truly done that? Against the best offense that they've played all year, are they really going to trust their linebackers, their safeties to put it together if they're going to do stunts and stuff like that with the defensive line? I actually think the linebackers are going to be a huge part of this game. Cody Simon's been playing really, really well, but they've also haven't asked him to do a whole lot in terms of creative things on the defensive line, blitzes, all that kind of stuff. I want to see him take more of an active role, and enforcing the issue with Oregon's offensive line. Like, bring more people than they can block with Cody Simon. Trust your safeties to stay in coverage for as long as they need to. And just get to Gabriel, because really that's the thing, man. Like, he was so comfortable sitting in the pocket. And, the knock against Gabriel at the beginning of the season was too many red zone turnovers. And you didn't see him sweat at all,
No.
during that game. And so you have to, it's not just about getting creative on the defensive line. I think it's got to be a whole defense philosophy about putting pressure on Gabriel mentally, showing pressure where he doesn't expect, actually implementing pressure where he doesn't expect. And like I said, I think a guy like Cody Simon's going to be a big part of that. So I hope that's what they end up going for. And look, if they come out rolling with the same game plan that they did against Tennessee and just throwing the ball over the place, and they're super aggressive on defense and they still lose, I'm cool with that. That's fine. At least you played Ohio State football. You put your players in the best position to win, and it didn't work out, then that's fine. But if they go back to, we're going to try to control this game, we're just going to squeeze these guys to death, I don't think you can beat Oregon doing that. And I would be really upset if Ohio State came out that way, having not learned the lessons of the destruction of Tennessee and tried to, just revert back to what they had done earlier in the season. I don't think they will. I think they understand who they are now, but they need to keep it up. They have to continue to do that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to evaluate, just because this is the one game I think across the entire season where Ohio State's defense didn't show up the way that they needed to. And
Right.
you can forgive them because they're playing, the only undefeated team left at this point, the team that has established itself as the best in college football to this point. So you can understand playing in their house in the fifth or in the middle of the season why they didn't have their best game. But it is interesting that that is the only game that they didn't show up, whereas for every other game, particularly all the other games where Ohio State's offense didn't show up, the defense was there to at least keep things competitive or outright win the game for them in ways that the offense couldn't really get done. Whereas the
Right.
offense did show up in the Oregon game. But the problem is, relative to the first game that happened, they obviously lost Josh Simmons during the game. They have since lost Seth McLaughlin. They are currently in a situation where, even though they have figured out how to plug the leaks in the dam, so to speak, they're still in a situation where they're going to be rotating 3 guards across the line and playing a player in Hinsman who they felt more comfortable moving over to guard at the position he was playing last year of center, and having Donovan Jackson, who had not been playing tackle prior to the middle of this season, operating in that left tackle spot, which is a spot he has had success in, but he is now going to be facing probably his second biggest test of the year. The first one, obviously, being the Penn State game, which was his first game, and he did a relatively good job. But there were still moments in that game where Abdul Carter for Penn State had success beating Jackson and generating pressure on Will Howard that otherwise stymied the offense. The best pass rusher that Oregon had or has was not available for the Ohio State game. He was a late injury scratch. So
Right.
Oregon is now in a more formidable position on defense, particularly on the line, than they were prior to the first meeting between these teams. And as much as we like to think Ohio State has figured out how to mitigate the current situation on the offensive line, you would be hard pressed to argue they're not in a worse situation than they were going into the first meeting between these teams.
Right.
And I
So,
expect that to
yeah,
play a
it's
pretty significant factor.
I think so too. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how they try to scheme up their way around that, because it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough to handle, the guard rotation, and what do they do about the tackle positions if they're getting torched? Like, there's a lot that they're going to have to figure out, and some of it might be on the fly during the game. So we'll see what that looks like. I do know
The last thing I want to say
Yeah, go ahead.
is relative to you were talking about how you think it kind of more hinges on the defense showing up or not. I am a little bit more curious about the offense. I think the defense, given how much more consistency we've seen out of them, is going to show up in ways that they didn't the first time these teams played, particularly being on a more neutral environment than the one they were in the first time.
Yeah.
What I'm more worried about is what you were alluding to a little bit earlier, in terms of, are they going to come out with that aggressive game plan that they had against Tennessee, or are they going to play more conservative? The offensive player that had the most success in that first meeting, other than Will Howard, was Travion Henderson. And they used Henderson against Tennessee and they did. I think we might have talked about it a little bit last week, but they were finally doing like check downs and swing routes and throwing behind the line of scrimmage in ways that we haven't
Yep.
seen them do all
100%.
season, in ways that we were
100%.
begging them to do with Kyle McCord last year as a way to try to mitigate his lack of mobility in the pocket.
Right. The
If
wheel
they
routes, yeah.
if they're creative in using Henderson, I think that that's going to be more conducive to their success in terms of getting him the ball in different areas of the field. But if they
Right.
revert to a more conservative game plan, if they're a little bit worried about Oregon's pass rush and they just are trying to plow ahead with him or Judkins, I I don't think it's out of the question that we could see them try to do a little bit more ball control in terms of
Mm-hmm.
bleeding clock and trying to keep Oregon's offense off the field, at least in theory. So I am a little bit more concerned about whether or not Ohio State's offense shows up in the rematch than I am the defense. Even though I just said I think the key to the game is going to be, whether the defense wins the turnover battle and generates pressure. But I expect them to do those things. I don't know what to expect with the offense, even coming off of probably the most impressive showing that they've had all season, just
Yeah.
because there's still a lot of question marks relative to the last two performances in consideration.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing, though. I mean, those two performances were so completely different from each other that, of course, you're justified in not really knowing how they're going to come out against Oregon. I mean,
And
you
there's
don't
just
know
been a
which team
lot
you're
of
going to see.
inconsistency all season in
Yeah,
general.
I would agree. So if they took the lessons from Tennessee that they need to go more up tempo, that they need to get the running backs involved out of the backfield, that they can do those screen passes for positive yardage, that's gonna I think that's gonna spell some good news for the game. But they have to maintain that aggression that they had from the very beginning. And then honestly, frankly, the most important part of that game against Tennessee, uh, that I was most impressed by, that I thought was most impactful, was them coming out of halftime, right? When they didn't have a massive lead. They could have, if Tennessee, I mean, in retrospect, Tennessee wasn't going to get anything done on offense, right? Like they were
But
they were cooked.
they conceded momentum towards the end of the
They
half
did.
for sure.
They did. And they needed to both stop Tennessee coming out of the locker room, which they did. And then they needed to score points, and they did not take their foot off the pedal. They did the exact same kind of stuff that they did in the first half that was working, and they scored points and scored points and scored points, and the game was done. Um, that's the kind of mentality that they need to have. There's no like, oh, well, we hit the reset button. It's like, no, go, 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 score points, do what you got to do, and you'll win the game. So they got to have that mentality. And if they come out with that, I'm a lot more optimistic about how this plays out.
I will say to that point, halftime adjustments have been a consistent theme of success for
Yes.
in consideration of the entire season. It's been good, which is why I wasn't really worried about them giving up some momentum at the end of the half against Tennessee. I thought they had enough, particularly because of how fast they started, which has been way less frequent, if happening at all. They never had a start to any game, even against Akron or
No.
any of their
That's by far
non-conference
the
games,
most points they
really.
scored in the first quarter all season. Yeah, it's not
Right.
even close.
They had enough success in that early stage where it's like, okay, we saw what we did well in the beginning of the game. We can figure out other ways to implement that coming out of the locker room. Like that's stuff we can build on, as opposed to when you have less success in the first half and you have to think about what you need to do differently to get a better result in the second half, as opposed to building on things you've already done well. It's easier to re-scheme and build on success you've had than it is to try to adjust to what hasn't been working and turn those failures into successes, which is something that the coaching staff deserves a lot of credit for, in terms of making that a consistent theme all year and getting more success out of the second halves. But the two games in which that hasn't been the case were obviously the Michigan game, and really, it doesn't get talked about a lot, but they did not play as well in the second half against Oregon as they did in the first half. Even though I
No, they
wouldn't
didn't.
say they started fast against Oregon in the first game, they were in a position where they could have won the game in the second half, but they only scored, I think, seven. Did they score 7 or 8 points, I think, in the second half of that
Yeah, they did.
game?
They slowed way down. Absolutely, they
Right.
did.
It was not. It was the one game other than all year, other than the Michigan game. It was the 1 year game where they did not play as well in the final 30 minutes as they did in the first half. So that is the one thing that makes me a little bit concerned is I don't know if I worry if Oregon is too talented to have that kind of scheming success again, particularly because, Dan Lanning is this 40 chess mastermind where he's, figuring out ways to
Right.
intentionally
To
get
break the rule
himself
book.
penalized
Yeah.
to the chagrin of Will Howard and Ryan Day's clock management. But I don't, that's the one thing that makes me concerned is that I don't know if Ohio State's going to be able to keep that recurring theme of second half adjustments going the way that they have for most of the rest of this season.
Right.
Just because nobody really talks about it, that second half that they had was not nearly as impressive as their first half. So if they have another fast start the way that they did against Tennessee, they're look out. But if they start slow, I don't know how much they're going to be able to dig themselves out of a hole just because Oregon is too talented and too well coached to not have ways to counter the counters that Ohio State would presumably implement.
I agree with that. Real quick, we do have to talk about this. We would be remiss if we weren't talking about the Ohio State men's basketball team coming out here. We did mention it last week.
We keep putting them on the back burner. We gotta give them some time to shine.
They've got months. We will get into it. And also, the real test is going to be coming up as Big Ten season starts. But Bruce Thornton, so we talked about it last week, how it was hilarious how
January is not kind to Ohio State
it's not.
basketball.
But it's hilarious that they came out last week, have one of their biggest wins in years, right before everybody completely ignores it because there's a football game going on. They do pretty much the same thing against Indiana State. Granted, a much lesser foe, but Bruce Thornton's got back-to-back 30-point games. That's pretty wild.
They did not win that Indiana State game the way they won the Kentucky game.
No, they did not. That was a different game. Absolutely. My point is that Ohio State men's basketball fever. I'm catching it. I'm just saying they're getting there. They're starting to look a little bit better than they did in that horrific loss that they had earlier
Johnny,
this season.
We've seen this movie so many times.
I know.
You can't give them your heart just yet.
I know. You're right.
You gotta see, and I'm not just saying that because I was the guy that was saying like, oh my God, they should have hired Dusty May and everything right before the Kentucky game happened.
They still should have hired Dusty May. That fact isn't.
I mean, granted, to Dusty May's credit, the 3 games that Michigan has lost this year, they've lost by like a combined 5 points. It's all been very, very close.
Mm-hmm.
And conceptually, you can still make arguments that Dusty May would have been a better fit than Diebler. But I mean, Diebler, he's been a giant killer, man. This is back-to-back years now where he's pulled off upsets over top 5 ranked teams. I mean, that's extremely impressive in its own right. And the most interesting thing to me was I said at the outset of the season that I thought Michi Johnson was going to be the X factor for this team this year.
Yeah.
Not in terms of like I think if this team is good, it's going to be because he's good, but just because it kind of hinges, the direction of the team kind of hinges on if he's involved, how he's playing. And if he's
like
bad,
he's like a bell cow.
Right. Well, I don't even know if bell cow is the right word. It's just more of if he's playing good, I expect the team to feed off that success.
Okay.
If he's playing bad, I expect the team to play accordingly. Right. And he was stinking up the joint prior to getting benched.
That's right.
And the team's success was reflected in that. Now, I think one thing that we may have been not giving as much, paying as much attention to as we should have relative to the recent performances is how much the team was missing the presence of Aaron Bradshaw because he's having him back has certainly been the biggest difference within the last 2 games other than
absolutely.
Michi's
coming off the bench and scoring like the way he has. I mean, he's a huge presence.
And I've been like, it feels like Ohio State. I think I said this when we did the podcast earlier this year when it was first announced he was coming in. It feels so rare that Ohio State has like a legit, authentic 7-footer
I know
that isn't that is actually like a physical presence inside that
right.
isn't either rail thin or some
Yeah.
meme European like Costa Kufis. It's like finally in all my years of this, they're not leaning on the Evan Ravenels of the world, the
How dare
awkward
you?
6'7" lefty thick centers
Well,
to establish
right.
the Dallas Lauderdales. And, I mean, even Sullinger, was undersized and bizarrely built for how great of a player he was at
Yeah.
Ohio State. It's like, finally, they're getting an athlete that is over 7 feet tall, that isn't rail thin. Like, I
Right.
should know the guy that played here last, Felix Okpara, that was here
Oh
last.
goodness.
It was great,
Yeah.
but the guy was not the kind of thick presence inside that Bradshaw is. It's like,
No.
finally they got one of these guys, and the circumstances of him leaving the team were so bizarre and kept under wraps that I think most people were just assuming the worst in terms of what was really going on, that we weren't really going to get him back. So when we're looking long term in terms of the bad results they were having, it was hard to see any light at the end of the
Sure.
tunnel. But him now returning to the team, them having he's going to have to stay healthy, because I think if they can't, what we've already seen is that they're not going to be able to tolerate's the wrong word, but they're not going to be able to endure having an extended absence from him again if this team wants to hit its ceiling. But when they have him here and they don't have Michi chucking it up and not doing anything to facilitate, and giving instead his role and minutes to guys like Kez Walker, this is a team that can be dangerous against just about anybody.
Well, they're more multidimensional when he's on the floor. You know what I mean? Like it's not a team where it's like, oh crap, we just have to jack up a bunch of J's because that's all we got. You know what I mean? Like
their 3-point shooting against Kentucky was not good, which is the craziest thing about them beating that team by 20 points.
Right. But they were able to go inside and outside at the same time. It wasn't a situation where Kentucky could just say, okay, we're just putting everybody on the 3-point line and just saying, all right, shoot. They had to account for that. And that changes the entire complexity of it. This isn't, you're right about the impact of him because, again, like just last year, they're like, how is Zed Key going to defend Zach Edey?
Like, another one.
Like
Zed Rafael Key.
I mean, and look, I love Evan Ravenel.
He had his best game of the season against Zach Edey, by the way, to his credit.
But that's not something you should expect of him. And that's the thing that just blows my mind, is that Ohio State was relying on these guys. Dallas Lauderdale, they're not bad players. They were good players for Ohio State, but they were asked to do things that they were not built to do.
The best teams in college basketball are not leaning on players like that to reach, the highest echelons of the sport.
No. Yeah. So anyway, it appears they've got something going, but Big Ten season starts. They got to play Sparty this Friday. I think that's going to tell you a lot about the direction of this team. As you said, George, we have been burned so many times. So many times by these guys.
And I still don't trust this team in true road games. The Kentucky game was a neutral site game. It was not in Lexington. So we got to see how they do on the road. But Diebler, to his credit, is the guy that snapped Holtman's dreadful Big Ten road losing.
I forgot about that. He did.
Yeah, that's right. So
good for him.
We can, we'll see how the long night for Ohio State basketball, as it's gone in recent years, proceeds from January into February. But there is certainly more reason for optimism with the recent changes than there were 2 weeks ago. I'm still fascinated about what's going to happen with Michi. Like, what do you figure something out? What do you do with him? You can't insert him back. I don't even think he should get a role on the team right now with how well that it's playing. Why would you invite that back into what has been the success of the last 2 games?
No, I don't think you can mess with what you've got. I think you have to stick with, what's been working and roll with it.
So what do you do with him?
I don't know. It's tough because you really do. I mean, honestly, like especially if you're Diebler, like this isn't a situation where it's like, okay, this is my system. I'm gonna build these guys up from scratch. Blah blah blah. He's coming in. He's got to be successful quickly. So for Diebler, it's all about winning games, and I think you just have to pit the 5 guys on the on the floor who are going to win you games, and it doesn't matter who those guys are. So if it's something's working right now, Thornton can drop 30 every night, which he can't. I mean, Bruce Thornton's been a
I
very
would like to
up
see
and
it.
down. I would too, but he's been an incredibly up and down player throughout his career, right? Like this is a guy who'll get you 30 one night and then like the next night he'll score 3 points. So you don't know. But if it's working, then stick with what you got. So we'll see how it goes. I'm excited to see the rest of the season. It'll definitely be interesting either way. We'll do some Ask Us Anything, but of course, before that, we remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the Dry Goods Store at 11warriors.com, drygoods.11warriors.com, shirts, hats, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. Check it out. It's awesome.
You gotta get
I
a
was
Buckeye
wearing,
Stanley on there,
I was
Surprised we haven't
wearing,
capitalized on that market.
I was wearing my hat, one of my Ohio State hats, last week, and somebody called me Waldo, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you have not seen Waldo."
I think it's more the glasses than the hat, honestly.
Well, I've got the 11 Warriors like winter beanie, and that's like if you want to see Waldo, I'm going to wear that next time, and you'll get the full experience.
Didn't
I
you
guess.
tell me
So,
you went as Waldo for Halloween in college once?
um, I don't think I did. I mean, I went like every day of my life because I look like him, but you know.
It must have been some other costume. You were telling me some. Oh wait, no, never mind. I'm thinking of another story you told me about an obscure costume that you wore for
I went as
Halloween
Freddie
in
Mercury
college.
once. That was
That's
a good
what it
one.
was.
There you go.
I don't know how
Wore
I
the red
got Waldo confused
suspenders.
with Freddie Mercury, but yeah.
Well, similar vibes, I guess. Uh, let's go ahead and do Ask Us Anything. And you can ask us anything by sending us questions to dubcast at 11warriors.com. Got some good questions here. We'll start with Matt in Minneapolis. So 2 questions, one from Matt and then one from his son.
Oh,
One,
okay.
didn't trust Ban and Urban continued Herbie from the Woody. I realize he was at senior tackle because his son is on the team, but it feels like he's been all over the Woody this year. Any idea who gave him carte blanche again? I don't know what his status is with the Woody. I don't even know if Tressel banning him is apocryphal or not. I don't know if that's a real thing that was actually ever implemented. Maybe it was. I don't know. I don't have any particular information. Um, I do think it's weird that a member of the media who, especially one who's been so willing to just like unsolicited talk smack on Ohio State would be given, any more access than a normal member of the media would. I understand that he's an alumni and all that stuff, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's a little odd. I don't know how you feel about it, George, but it seems just kind of weird to me in general.
Yeah, I can't. I would think it would be in not good, like just to. It wouldn't be a
Like
good look to the
optics.
common
Yeah.
prior to the right prior to the last couple of weeks where the national tide has turned against Herbstreit. I think it would have been bad optics to have a unofficial ban in place on a alumnus like Herbstreit, who is such a prominent media member for the sport. I feel like that would be a little bit more common knowledge among Ohio State fans if such a thing was actually in effect. Maybe that was true during the Tressel era. It would certainly explain why Terrell Pryor had such strong feelings about Herbstreit back then. But I can't remember ever hearing or thinking anything like that while Urban was the coach. And I wouldn't have any reason to believe that it exists now.
Yeah.
Although it would explain a lot of, I have a much more irrational theory on that I kind of talked about last week on why Kirk is so willing to throw away or throw under the bus his attachment to Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
But if there were actually such a ban in place, that would help explain a lot of the the anti-Ohio State sentiment, right? It would help explain a lot of where he's coming from and what he says, relative to, you know, not only just this season but a lot of other recent ones. So I'm not willing to totally dismiss it. I haven't heard anything credible that would make me think such a thing exists at this point.
This is okay. So this is from Matt's son. Little man wants to know your opinion: PlayStation or Xbox?
Oh God, this isn't even a question. Johnny, what?
Well,
I hope you're enjoying Elden Ring. What console did I purchase that for you on?
That is for the PlayStation 5 console.
That's right.
Which is what I play. I definitely go PlayStation. You know what? I used to be a big Nintendo guy when I was a kid, right? Like Nintendo 64 was my jam when I was, you know, a preteen and all that. That came out. I
wasn't allowed to have one of those.
Sad.
Yeah.
But I had an N64 and then I got a GameCube, which was like, you know, that was very indie of me. That was very punk rock of me, I guess, to get the GameCube instead of the Xbox or the PS2 or whatever. But then when I lived in Japan, first of all, it's, you know, obviously Sony everything, so that gets much more play. Although Nintendo, of course, got a lot of play too. But all of my friends, we would go over and play like Call of Duty and stuff on the PlayStation. When I got back to the United States, I was like, all right, I'm going to buy myself a PS3 so I can play Call of Duty, you know, play with my friends and all that stuff. And then I started playing like Uncharted and all these other PlayStation exclusives. And I was like, well, screw it. I'm just getting PlayStations from now on. So I got a PS3, I've gotten a PS4, and now PS5. And I feel like that's the right move because Xbox is kind of floundering right now.
Yeah.
You know, so just real quick, PlayStation's got way better exclusives. So I'm PlayStation all the way.
Yeah. My first console was a PlayStation 2. And, that was back when things were still kind of ambiguous in terms of some people had Xboxes, some people had PlayStations.
Sure, yeah.
The time to have an Xbox was the 360. That was during the Halo era. That was when I pivoted from because I didn't want to be one of the I grew up around a lot of people that had both, and I was like my parents weren't going to entertain that, and I didn't even really want to entertain that. It's like I'm good with one or the other. Especially back then, that was when the console wars were at their.
Of course. Well, remember how PlayStation came out with like a ridiculous price point on the PS3 or whatever, and everybody was making fun of them?
I don't remember that actually. But I do remember it would make sense that the Xbox 360 was a little bit cheaper. But the main thing that I think it's funny that things have worked out how they have relative to exclusives, because the big thing that I think swayed a lot of people over to 360 was the Halo era. And that was the main reason I switched. All my friends were getting ready to play Halo 3. That was like golden age in terms of like when the world would still stop for a video game release. I feel like nothing.
People like camp out at GameStop.
Nothing. The release of Halo 3, I never again experienced anything like people calling in sick to play a video game the way that they did for that one.
You know what's funny?
It was crazy.
So I actually had an Xbox 360, and the reason why I had an Xbox 3, I had a very specific version that they only manufactured for like 6 months. It was the one without an external hard drive or an internal hard drive. You had to buy an external hard drive for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it because my grandmother went on the Ellen show to be in the audience. And on that specific episode, they gave everybody in the audience a free Xbox 360. And so when she came back from her
Winfrey DeGeneres show.
Yeah. Well, when she came back, she was like, Johnny, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And I'm like, I guess I'll take it.
You're going to give it to me. That's what you're
That's right. But I couldn't play more than one game at a time on it. Cause like, I'm not buying a freaking external hard drive for this crap.
Yeah.
And so I could only play one game at a time because it only had enough storage space for one game. So it was pretty silly, but I got it, and I don't know what I did with it. I think we just ended up donating at a certain point because it was so stupid. But
yeah,
shout out to Grandma Gunner.
But the key, just to give Matt's this was Matt that wrote in, correct?
Matt's son had the question.
Matt's son, the full context of why things have worked out now the way that they have. The big moment, because people were wondering, this was still the moment in the culture wars of the consoles where it was Xbox 360 and PS3 were still going neck and neck. And then E3 happened about a year before the next generation of consoles came out. And Xbox gave their presentation for the Xbox One, and people were like, oh, yeah, okay, this is the next generation. But then they gave the PS4 conference. And the PS4 conference presentation that came after the Xbox One just took a giant steaming dump on everything that the Xbox people just said. And then they punctuated it at the end of it by putting it out at $100 less than what they said the Xbox One was going to be.
Yeah.
And that moment lives very, very distinctly in my mind relative to video game culture, because I remember when that happened, all of my friends that we had been playing on Xbox 360 and Xbox Live parties for years, everybody all agreed it's PS4. There's no doubt in terms of what's going to the next one. And I've been on PlayStation since.
If I remember correctly, there was also a whole thing about how Xbox didn't want you to be able to play used games on the console.
There was a little bit of that controversy too,
which just added to it.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, good question. I hope, Matt, I hope your son is on the PlayStation bandwagon. But if not, he'll get there eventually, because I don't think Microsoft will continue manufacturing the Xbox. At a certain point, they're going to just get out. Bonus question from Matt. How much NIL money do you think it would take to get Minnesota to host a playoff game? I would love to see Bama / Ole Miss, Florida, Miami walk into a -30 wind chill and try to play ball. I don't know, man.
If they have a playoff game, they're going to do it at US Bank Field.
They will. Wherever the Vikings play. That was actually my initial thought.
There's no way it would happen at Minnesota.
It'd be too.
Yeah.
In December, it'd be too ridiculous.
There's no way they would do that.
All right, this next one.
Unless Minnesota makes the first round of the CFP, then I could see it.
They might. Like I said, hell, if Indiana could do it. All right, so this is from Kevin. Guys, do you think that Ohio State has filled its needs in the transfer portal? I mean, first of all, I love the pickups that they've gotten so far. Getting 2 tackles, getting a tight end, the guy that they got from Rice, people are super stoked about. They think he's basically like the left tackle of the future, more or less. He's got NFL written all over him.
They said he'd be a second round, but some people think he'd be a second round pick in this year's draft.
Yeah, so I'm cool with that. I think they've addressed most of their offensive line needs. I think they'll probably take another guy for depth, because they really have none at this point. Maybe defensively, maybe in the secondary, I think they might want to pick up another guy or two. I don't see them making huge moves, though. I think for the most part, they've gotten who they wanted offensively. I think they need to, like I said, just kind of look at depth pieces, particularly at linebacker and safety, I think, coming up here. Because you're going to want a guy that can hang, and give you what Ransom gave you. The cornerbacks, I think, should be fine, but maybe another guy there too. So that's where I would look if you're thinking about guys that they might pick up.
I'm not usually one to slander another George, but I'm not totally stoked on the signing they made out of Idaho State. I feel like that
on the defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that they probably do a little bit better in that department.
That's a weird signing for me. Yeah, I'm with you on that a little bit. We'll see how that works out.
The biggest thing they needed to address, obviously, was the offensive line. And I think we've talked about it a little bit on the show before about how it feels like they're gravitating towards a model where they are trying to more regularly address that in the portal than they are through recruiting. And I still think that they need to either, whether it's Fry getting out of his own way and figuring it out, or replacing Fry with somebody that can hit on these elite prospects coming out of high school. They still need to do a better job of addressing that. Otherwise, depth is going to be a recurring issue if they just try to rely on the portal every year to fill these gaps, because the two best linemen that they had going into this season were both portal acquisitions. Now they're no longer available, and we've seen the situation they're in terms of trying to tread water with replacing both of those guys.
Right.
That being said, the guy that's currently tasked with managing the offensive line has proven that he is somebody that can raise up these prospects that have proven themselves to some degree in the collegiate game and put them in a position where they can raise themselves into either elite NFL draft talent or at the very least serviceable college football players with all-American potential. So the fact that they have gone to this well again in terms of raising these guys up. I also didn't realize that the guy from Minnesota was only 19 years old.
Yeah.
So that kind of explains why I think he's a little bit more of a lithe frame, if you will. Is it lithe or lithe? It's one of those words I've seen only written, never said out loud.
No,
anyway,
there's a lot of that. Yeah,
he's skinnier than you would expect for a guy playing tackle, but luckily they have a strength and conditioning coach with a reputation for over bulking a lot of the football players. So it's like, in terms of adding weight, it's like, I'm pretty confident that they have the personnel to figure out how to do that for this guy. So I'm satisfied. I do wish that I don't really know how to feel about tight end because they hardly ever use their tight ends to the extent that they should anyway. And this guy is the guy they got from Purdue is, I think, a much more established.
He's legit. He's
pass
really,
catcher
really good.
than, well, he's good, but he's good at catching passes, not necessarily at blocking, which is what we've more traditionally seen Ohio State use their tight ends for. So even though he's got a great skill set, I don't know if they're going to make the most.
Does Kaczmarek have another year of eligibility, or is this it for him? I forget.
I'm not sure.
Because I think he's filled that role pretty well. I think that he has done, like, there's been a difference when they go to those, like super heavy packages, like, line, goal line type stuff. Kaczmarek has featured really prominently, right? When they go to a 2 tight end set or a 3 tight end set, like they did a couple times. And I think he blocks pretty well. They want a guy like G. Scott who can, make those catches when you need to. And G. Scott did great, I thought, against Tennessee. I like this dude out of Purdue really a lot. I think he's going to be really good in terms of like pass catching and whatnot. But you're right.
I just don't know if they're going to use him to what his strengths are that he's demonstrated. Right. So I'm not as enthused about that signing. I'm happy that they've addressed offensive line, and I agree with you. I would like to see them maybe get one more guy for depth purposes, but I think it's kind of hard to get a top level talent guy telling him at the same time, like, you're probably just going to be a, insurance policy for somebody that's already here. So remains to be seen what they do there. But overall, I can live with the way it is right now because Fry's proven he can raise up the kind of talent that they just got out of the portal. So,
this one here is from Joshua F., which he put the entire question in the subject line, which is, do you mind if people send their whole message in the subject line and leave the email blank? I don't have a problem with it. I think it's fine. If it's a short message, whatever, make it short and sweet. You don't have to write a whole novel to me explaining why you sent me the email. If you have a very short email, I'm cool with that. Whatever helps me get the information back to you faster, go for it. I don't really care.
Yeah, just don't make your subject line a paragraph, If you've got a more, if there's more of a lead in if your question requires context, you might want to put something in the body. At the same time, if you send a bodiless email, it might get labeled as spam, and then we'll never. That's a good point. You have to wonder how many Ask Us Anythings have been lost to the spam filter.
I didn't think about that.
Do you check the spam filter often?
I've never checked.
You should go dumpster diving and see.
I should.
We could do a whole episode of lost Ask Us Anythings in the history of the Dubcast.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. All right, so that's Ask Us Anything. Let's go ahead and just wrap up here with a few other things. I mean, obviously, other bowl games have been going on. SEC has not looked great. USC beat the Aggies. Texas A&M, Navy edged out Oklahoma. Shout out to Ohio boy. I think taking him out in that last 90 some yard run. That was pretty sick. The ACC though is 1-9 in bowl games right
Big
now.
oof.
That's pretty terrible. The big news, though, people were talking about Miami and Iowa State. Cam Ward played the first half, I think threw like 3 touchdowns, got the touchdowns record, and then said, I'm out. And initially I was like, who gives a crap? Like nobody, these games don't matter. It's not like it's part of the playoff. Who gives, whatever. But then I was like, wait a minute. Miami paid him millions of dollars to transfer to their school and play football. This argument, the argument that he didn't owe them anything, I think may have held water like 3 or 4 years ago. But no, he absolutely owes them something. They're paying him money to do this. So I kind of think he should have either sit out the whole game or don't, or play the whole thing. Like the half and half thing, even if it was an agreement with the team or the coaches, it feels super weak.
I mean, Miami's defense had enough investment in it that they were throwing punches at each other on the sideline because they kept giving up touchdowns to the Cyclones. So
exactly.
You'd like to see your quarterback care as much, right?
He's getting paid millions of dollars. Like, I don't know. To me, that's a bad look.
By the way, as of the day we're recording this, December 29th, in case you were curious about how the bowl picks have gone between Johnny and myself after the Dubcast a couple weeks ago, Johnny went into the weekend with a slight lead over yours truly because he
because they put in so much time and effort into.
Well, he did the meme thing, and he leaned into all the Ohio State teams or all teams in the state of Ohio, rather.
Right.
Who would have guessed? I think the MAC is undefeated in bowl play this year.
I shouldn't have said except Miami, because Miami came out and annihilated. I forget who they were playing.
We both picked them to win. They were playing Colorado State, and we both picked Colorado State. Yeah. However, after a big day yesterday in which I picked 3 games against what Johnny estimated, including UConn and Nebraska and TCU, I have since recaptured the lead, and I'm now 13-12. Johnny is 11-14. So we've got 3 games left in which we have conflicting picks, and it's the 3 last bowl games that aren't the CFP. Texas State, North Texas, Minnesota, Virginia Tech, and Liberty versus Buffalo. You were once again banking on the MAC and the Big Ten fade, and I'm going the opposite way. So those 3 games are going to decide between us who was more on the button.
Damn.
But it's been close, But I wonder how many other people have been really that much further out from half wins, half losses, just because so much of this has been volatile.
Well, it's like you say,
went to overtime too. So
when you're right 52% of the time, you're wrong 48% of the time. So I mean, it's just just something people got to keep in mind. That's funny. That's definitely something we should keep an eye on. I appreciate that.
I am keeping an eye on it because I'm a very normal and well-adjusted person.
Speaking of which, Nick Saban said Ohio State fans need to get therapy for their Michigan session.
Nice transition.
Thank you. He's probably not wrong. It's just really funny to me. I was listening to a
pot meat kettle.
Yeah, I know exactly. I was like, hang on a second. I was like, okay, maybe, but also, didn't somebody from like your fan base kill a bunch of trees because they were angry that like Auburn had any sort of success whatsoever? Wasn't that something that your fan base did? So I'm just saying, there's crazy people everywhere. This is not unique to Ohio State.
I'll never forget in the national championship where they played Notre Dame, which was non-competitive from the jump. When AJ McCarron got in a fight with Ben Jones towards the end of the game, and Jones just kind of shoved him dude, we're up 42-14. You need to not scream in my face. We're fine. And then they cut over to Saban, and Saban is throwing a screaming fit at the officials
Yeah,
on the
right.
sideline for like calling it
Yeah,
a late
that's
game.
right.
So it's like, dude, you're up 42-14. You should not be screaming at these people, anybody. And
Right.
that's not even going into all the other times where he's gone off on his own players or whatever. It's like
Right.
you with your own anger management issues have no, and I understand you're a person demanding of success and it's why you're in the position you're in, and that's
Yeah, yeah,
fine.
yeah. But
But
still.
you really like are not, should not be in the position where you need to be telling people to go to therapy on anything. I'm glad Shane Gillis served him some humble pie
I know, that
on the
was
game
really
day
funny.
desk
That
a
was pretty
couple
great.
days ago, because he, even though he kind of took it in stride, you could see the steam coming out of his ears while he had to listen to this comedian
Oh my God.
throw him under the bus.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that he was like 5 seconds away by saying like, "Who the hell are you?" Like,
he would have screamed at Gillis if they were off camera for saying that.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, that's hilarious. All right, last thing before we get out of here, how do you think the Oregon game's going to come out?
I said that Oregon's going to win the national championship, and I'm sticking.
The implications of which me.
I'm sticking by that. Yeah. It's hard for me to get, even though I expect the defense to have a better showing for Ohio State to have a better showing than they did in the first game. I think that the offense is in a more compromised position than it was in the first meeting. And I think Oregon is going to be able to capitalize on that in a way that other teams haven't. And I can't give Ryan Day the benefit of the doubt that this team is going to have the late game execution that it needs to get them over the top in this situation. If I'm proven wrong, great. But it not only was an issue against Michigan, but it was also an issue in the final minute of the first meeting between these teams. And in a close game, I have to go with the team that has proven infallible to this point in Oregon. Yeah. And I think that they are, frankly, a little bit better coached under Lanning than this team has been under Day, even though Day is coming off of his strongest performance of the season, no doubt. So I think it will be a close game. Again, I don't know if it's going to be as close as the first meeting, because how much more closer can it really be than that? But I can't feel good about Ohio State's offense showing up better than they did in the first game, given they're in a more compromised state than they were the first time that they played. So give me Oregon to win another close game here and go on to win the title.
That's kind of where I'm at. I think it's going to be very close as well. I could easily see it being, within 3 points again. But I'm with you. I mean, I don't know how much more improved the defense will be to make up for the fact that the offense is going to be, having to make up for a lot of, missing pieces on the offensive line. And I know I said that. That was my same reasoning against Tennessee, right? Like, Tennessee has a great defensive line. I don't know what they're going to do. But I think the difference is that Oregon is going to have more success against Ohio State's defense than Tennessee was able to have. And as a result, that's going to put more pressure on Ohio State's offense, who I don't think is going to score 21 points straight to start the game, right? If they do, that's great. That's awesome. That changes everything. But if you're in a situation where you're going back and forth and there's lead changes, I think in the first game there's like 7 lead changes, something insane like that. That is a game where the offensive and defensive lines matter more than other games. And I think because of that, eventually towards the end of the game, you're going to an Ohio State offensive line that's not going to be able to hold up against.
Not only Oregon's that, they got bailed. Ohio State's offense on that first series against Oregon got kind of bailed out on what was a pretty bad penalty call that eventually set up their first touchdown on the opening drive.
Right.
It was kind of a similar situation with the Tennessee game last week with the face mask on, although that wasn't a bad penalty.
No,
it was just another situation in which a penalty bailed Ohio State out on the first drive, where if that doesn't take place, how much different is the momentum for both teams to start the game? So if Ohio State doesn't get that call against Oregon in the beginning of the game, they don't get that opening drive touchdown, given the other turbulence they encountered throughout the rest of the game,
who knows
how much more different is the result? So if they don't have that same kind of fortuitousness early on, maybe Oregon's able to get out to a lead much quicker than they did in the first game.
And look, if we're wrong, please feel free to let us know about it. I will be happy to take all the slings and arrows that you can provide. But, hopefully next time we talk about it, we'll be able to eat as much crow as we can and enjoy the next game, I guess. So we'll be back next week to talk all about it. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks. Happy New Year.